Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Fahad Bataina, and I work for ICANN. I'm a stakeholder engagement senior manager covering the Middle East. I would like to welcome you all to the third day of the Middle East DNS Forum. So today is the third and final day, and today's topics will revolve around internationalized domain names, IDNs, and universal acceptance. Of course, as the previous 2 days, we have two sessions, 90 minutes each. The first session, the morning session, will include three presentations. All three presentations will be about internationalized domain names, and we have a diverse set of presenters. And of course, the afternoon session, which starts at 11 a.m. UTC, will have a panel discussion of 90 minutes on universal acceptance. And of course, once that concludes, we will be having a very quick closing session. So without further ado, I would like to invite our colleague Ali Al-Hushayan from the Communications and IT Commission of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to talk about their experience with internationalized domain names and utilizing domain names for the benefit of the Arabic language. I just posted a comment in the chat pod. It's expected standards policy. And of course, there are some hints there on how to place questions and comments in the chat pod. I would encourage you all to keep all the sessions interactive. Please make your comments. Please ask questions. If you would like to speak, you can also raise your hand and take the mic. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ali. So Ali, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fahad. Hello, everyone. This is Ali Al-Hushayan. I work for SaudiNIC, which is now part of CITC. I'll be presenting today a little bit of history about supporting the internationalized domain names within SaudiNIC. Then I'm going to go over some technical details, then our specific solution and implementation. It's going to be a quick one, and I hope I hope it will be as clear to everyone. Can I share the slides now?
Yes, Ali, you are a co-host, so please go ahead and share the slides at your end.
Okay, can you see the presentation now?
Yes, Ali, I can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this is what I just said. We will going to talk about a little bit of history. I will not really dig deep into the history because I joined CITC in 2018, so I'm on the operational side of things mostly than the rules and decisions that have been taken in the past years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about SaudiNIC. SaudiNIC is the Saudi Network Information Center, which is responsible for managing the .sa and Naqta Saudiya CCTLDs. It started in 1995 when the King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology applied to IANA for the .sa CCTLD. And moved to CITC in 2006 as a small unit. We used to provide direct registration for our registrants up to this year, because since this we moved to the registrar model. SaudiNIC was one of the leading organizations in supporting the Arabic internationalized domain names. About me a little bit, as I told you, I joined in 2018 and just a software developer, and my role in SaudiNIC is a DNS researcher. I am the lead maintainer for the EBB system here, and I worked with the TFA IDN to review and finalize the second level LGR. So my experience in this topic is kind of narrow, but I'm going a little bit. I'm going to focus on the technical side here. Okay, so SaudiNIC has participated in many consortiums, work groups, and task forces during the years to put standards to what should go into Arabic domains and what should not go, and how to manage these domains. Okay, a little bit about the Arabic language for the non-native speakers here. It has about 310 million native speakers. The Arabic internet users are about 5.2% of the total internet users. This might seem small, but considering the population of the world, this is a huge number. And Arabic is also written from right to left. So it can cause some rendering problem in old software and in software that does not support fully support the Unicode standard. Also, it has different shapes depending on the position, and this was one of the main points that we have taken into consideration when we implemented our system. But since the last revision for the second level LGR, the positions are not taken into consideration. So we have less complexity in the variant generation overall. Okay, some of the Arabic features that were discussed during the years and were decided that it will not be included when registering Arabic domains. So one of the Arabic properties is the diacritics. Diacritics are just some let's say a way or a tool that to provide a phonetic guide for the proper pronunciation of the word. So like in English, the pronunciation, you have to read the dictionary to know the proper pronunciation. Like if I say night, am I talking about the night, day and night, or night, the man who fights enemies? So in Arabic we have a solution, the diacritics, that can explain within the word itself how to pronounce it. These can like this example, qadar or qadr, depending on the pronunciation, the meaning totally changes. Using them in the Arabic domain names can cause confusion, especially in the address bar where the text is so small, they might not be rendered correctly, and they are not useful in the domain context, since domains were a solution to make accessing distant hosts easier, so if we add diacritics, it will just make it harder. Other features in the Arabic language is the Kashida, or the Arabic Tatwil code, Arabic Tatwil point. It is used mostly to improve the printing output, and can be used by software like Word and Pages to justify the text. So they also cause confusion and can lead to phishing attacks and other things. So in Arabic, we have a different set of numbers from the common numbers that are used in the Latin script. We have the Arabic index digits and the extended Arabic index digits. The first set of numbers is used in the Arabic language. The other set can be used in other languages within the Arabic script. One one thing to take into consideration that Windows does not store the real Unicode number for these digits, and it just normalizes these digits to the common digits, and then display the appropriate shape according to the context. Okay. This is just one of the points that were discussed over the years and was decided in many drafts and standards to not be included. We will talk a little bit about DNS. DNS does not support any encoding strings in Unicode. It only encodes strings in ASCII, in the ASCII encoding, which is a byte for each character. So we needed a way without disturbing the DNS standard. So the IDNA standard was proposed, and we used the bunny code for encoding Unicode strings into ASCII strings. It was revised again in 2008. You know, with this solution, there is too much, or let's not say too much. The responsibility of supporting IDN domains has been moved up the stack to the application developers. In 2000, into the 2000s up to 2007, there were a small set of applications that need to be supported, like web browsers, email clients. So it's mostly about the internet applications or connected applications. But after the introduction of the iPhone in 2007, I think the adoption got a little bit behind, since each application developer had to support IDN and had to put extra work in IDN. As a software developer, when I work with strings, old languages that have existed since the 2000s, 2005, did not take even UTF-8 into consideration. Like, let's take C#. C# uses UTF-16 for encoding strings. So when it comes like to emojis, we have to do extra work to support emojis. PHP, on the other hand, it's only ASCII. iPhones, up to the introduction of the Swift language, just use the Objective-C, which is a language from the 90s or the 80s, I think. So from the registry perspective, the registry had to manage all the huge number of variants to ensure that there is no phishing attacks, and ensure that only one label of these variants are registered for a set of characters. We also needed a solution to activate desired variants and activate other variants for international reachability. Excuse me. So this solution needs to be fast and robust. It should generate the same, let's say, key for identifying the different variant sets each time. And if this fails, this can lead to problems. Also, the other solution is just to register all of the possible variants for some name within the database. And let's take, for example, the place I work for, which is هيئة الاتصالات وتقنية المعلومات. This has about 14 billion variants. So if I have to register them all, this does not make any sense. Also, if the variance problem has been solved at the DNS level, even if we use the Pani code, but there's some character folding or normalization when the DNS compares two labels, then registries won't have to worry much about the DNS or about the variants or activating the different variants. Okay, so let's talk now about the Arabic labels. There are a lot of standards and recommendations that we used in our implementation, and also we are now after the second level LGR is approved, we are going to move to the same rules. Okay, so these are the rules taken from the recommendations, and some are specific to Saudi NIC. So the length should be between 3 and 63 points. No diacritics or any other marks are allowed. There is no mixing between different scripts. Like the only CCTLD we allow to register Arabic domains is نقطة السعودية. Other Latin CCTLDs are not allowed. We stick with the LDH format for host names, and there are some common rules that are present in the original DNS standard or hostname standard. Also, we allow the usage of the common digits, since Windows will just happily encode all type of digits into the ASCII digits. Sorry about this. There are a lot of rules, but they are present in the SaudiNIC website, and they are also checked by the system. So I'm not going over the obvious ones or the ones that are discussed during the or the ones that are present in the LGR, like no digit mixing, where you take one digit from one set of digits and mix it with the other set. So there are some specific policies here for us. So Arabic domains only allowed under the نقطة السعودية CCTLD, and domain registration or labels registered must be Arabic labels, no other languages within the Arabic script. Variants can be activated for other languages within the Arabic script. Okay, so this is the latest Arabic table taken from the second level LGR. These are the this is the Arabic language, not the Arabic script, and these are the numbers supported with the hyphen. Okay, so to allow for international reachability and also allow users from other Arabic, other countries that use the Arabic script to access local websites, we need to allocate and enable variants that uses other characters from other languages. Most Arabic script languages like Pashto, Urdu, Persian, and other languages share a common set of characters with the Arabic language, but differ in some, like in the CAF, in the FAG group, in the HAG group. There are some differences. Here is an example. The first keyboard is taken from an OS10. This is an OS10 layout. The first keyboard is Arabic. Then we can see the Pashto, Persian, and Urdu. There are similar characters, but you can see some characters have different shapes, which means they have different Unicode code points. So we need to take these into consideration. So here's my name written in Arabic and Pashto, Persian, Urdu. You can see the Pashto, Persian, Urdu uses can have the same set of code points, but Arabic have different set of code points. Also, the other example is the bank. Okay, so after ICANN launched the IDN CCTLD fast track process, and SaudiNIC got نقطة السعودية in 2010, we needed to implement a solution to manage our variant. So our internal system called VMS, which is Variant Management System. We originally started with these languages, the same as the other three plus Malay. So we use the original tables that were defined by IANA in the era before 2010. With just some modifications, we added variants for each character and which disposition for this variant. Is it activated, which means it should be activated to allow for international reachability. I'm just sorry for a minute. This is my first public presentation, and if I am talking so fast, please tell me to slow down. Okay, sorry about this. We just used the basic tables and added the different variants for the different characters after studying the Unicode table. Also, after this, we process these variants into a way that we figure in all transitive variants and reflective variants, and we assign variant code points in different shapes. So in the beginning shape can have different variants than the middle shape, than the final shape, than the isolated shape. So let's take, for example, sorry about this, the example is not in the slides, but for the Arabic speaking users here, ta marbuta anha. They are just variants in the final form, and they are not variants in the other forms. So we should not generate other variants for them. But the latest second level LGR does not take shapes into consideration for the sake of simplicity, but they use actions, and these actions are just like filters. When variants are generated, they are moved through the actions and decided if this is an appropriate variant or not. So also the dispositions. Suppose that one character in Arabic has a variant B, which is allocatable, and the same character in like Persian have variant C as as let's say blocked. So we will make it allocatable, since Arabic Arabic needs this variant to be allocatable. This is how we merge the tables together. Thank you, Mr. Bahar. I think I put another example of the variance group again. Sorry, this is just the variant table, and these are the variant groups. So we generate keys depending on the set of variants and other properties, like it is in the beginning, middle, final, isolated. You can define more properties as you need. Like if you use the solution for other languages, like East Asian languages, I don't know if they have special cases, but they can be used to define more precise keys. Okay, so this is what I just explained. We are running out of time, so I'm going to be quick with the rest of the slides. So here's an example word called التقنية, which stands for technology. So these are the code points, and after we move them through the algorithm, we get this key. This key can be used, it can be saved in the database and indexed, so we can do fast lookup to determine if any variant is registered or not. Also, these are just numbers from our library. So التقنية has a lot of variants, but the possible variants, excluding the language mixing, variants that can never be written by a user. Like if we take one character from Persian and one character from Urdu, this can never be typed by a normal keyboard. So it's a made-up variant. So it's less likely to be used. So we will just exclude it. Allocatable variants. These are that have the disposition allocatable and activated that are preferred to be activated. Okay, so how does SaudiNIC deal with all this complexity? We hide all this complexity from our users. When a user registers a domain, we will just ask him what domain he wants. Okay, if this is a valid domain within the Arabic language, it is saved in our database, and the variant key is generated. So, and this is after registering the domain, and the user goes to the control panel for his domain. We show him suggested variants, which are based on the activated and some ranking algorithms. Heuristics are here. The ranking algorithm is based on some heuristics. So in some example, let's take Ali Al-Hashiyan, which is my name. The first two letters from the second word, they are just articles, like the word they, that in English. So these characters can never appear in different variant forms. So the variants are ranked, and the characters in this shape have a higher rank, and other shapes have lower rank. So here's an example of the ranking. The first, starting from the left, the first label is desired because it has the proper characters. The second is a variant, but it's not desired since the alif with madda above and the alif with hamza below does not make any sense. And same goes for the third and the final one. Here is another filter where we sync the ta marbuta and the ha at the end. So if we have multi-words label, and some of them have ta marbuta or ha at the end, it is preferred to be synced. So when I use when it comes to writing, the second form is actually wrong, but some users tend to be lazy and use ha instead of ta marbuta. So it is desired to activate this one, but not desired to activate mixed ha and ta marbuta. Same goes for ya and alif maqsura. So when we talk about alif maqsura in Saudi Arabia, we use the ya form without the two dots below. In other countries like Egypt, they use the form with two dots below. So we have to activate these desired variants. So how does our system play with the LGR? LGR is used by ICANN to define what characters are allowed in a language or script and what are the rules to generate these variants. These can be easily migrated to our system. And special rules are written in some programming language. On the other hand, in LGR, you define a regular expression in an XML form, and you move every variant through it to decide if it's allowed or not. Also, the VMS can be extended for other languages. Now it supports, I would say it supports languages like Arabic, Latin languages, but it might not support East Asia languages, like let's say Japanese, where you have three sets of characters. Some of the kanji characters, like let's say kaze, which is wind, it's actually composed of two hiragana or katakana characters. So LGR supports this feature, VMS does not support it, but can be extended easily. Okay, when publishing variants, when you register any variant and we need to publish them, variants are just published with the same name servers as the original domain, and all this complexity is hidden from the user. This is my slides. If you are interested in our solution, you can contact us at idn@nic.net.sa. I was trying to prepare a demo today, but I ran out of time. I could not host this demo. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ali. So any questions for Ali? So Ali, you mentioned that the library will be converted. I mean, you will be doing it in an open source format. So when do you anticipate to do that? I mean, you did say soon, but I mean, what does soon exactly mean? Or distant future, you mentioned.
It's in the not too distant future. So the library is ready. We have been using it in production since 2010, but we need to discuss some legalities. Then we were going to open source it. We need to open source it actually because we have now registrars who need this library to register domains and other variants to serve their customers. So it's going to be open soon, and we would like to hear your use cases and interests at this email.
Okay, thanks, Ali. So actually, I also see a question in the chat pod from Muhammad al-Shunnaq, and he asks it in Arabic. So I'll probably I'll try to translate it. So he asks, in your view, who are the entities that are responsible for marketing internationalized domain names, and what are the plans or the marketing plans to actually promote such domain names? So maybe, Ali, do you want to talk about this or expand on this from a Saudi Arabia perspective?
Okay, from our perspective, the main marketing role used to be done by SaudiNIC. So we have run a couple of ads in the beginning of the project promoting IDNs. We have good registration numbers. I think about 3,500 up to 4,000 IDN domains. But now this responsibility has moved to our registrars. So it's part of their now, since we are just now working as the registry role, we are going to provide the solutions and the tools they need to promote this.
Okay, thanks, Ali. I'll just take one last question in the chat pod. So it comes from Munir Badr, and he says, you mentioned the registry registrar model. When can international domain companies apply to become a registrar under .sa and .Saudiya? I'm not sure if you're the right person to answer, but if you can, please go ahead.
I'm not really the right person, but you can use the same email to ask about this. But we are now in the first, let's say, in the first milestone. We are just allowing local small businesses to be registrars. I don't know exactly when we are going to open it outside, because our registration rules need auditing and verification of the identity of the registrant before registration. So I don't know how our external companies can perform these checks. But okay, I'm not the appropriate person. You can use the email again.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ali. I mean, I can also speak to Munir off list and maybe share with him contact details so that he can contact you guys. We actually have another question from Shiva Subramanian Mutsami from India. I don't think we'll be able to read the question and answer it by voice as we are, running out of time. So if you can, Ali, maybe answer Shiva in the chat pod while we move on to the next presentation. So thank you, Ali. This was really interesting. SaudiNIC always has a unique experience when it comes to Arabic script IDNs. Our next presenter will be Emily Taylor. Emily Taylor is the Chief Executive Officer of the Oxford Internet Labs. She's joining us from Oxford in the United Kingdom, and she'll be sharing with us findings of the latest IDN World Report. So Emily, welcome, and the floor is yours. You're muted, Emily. We can't hear you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Fahad. I've just shared my screen. I hope you can see that. It's such a pleasure to be back with you, even virtually. The Middle East DNS Forum is a real high point of the year for myself and Giovanni Seppia of URID, because we find that we always have the best conversations about internationalized domain names with you and the friends and colleagues from the region. So today I'd just like to give you a very high level view of our most recent IDN World Report. For those of you who may not be familiar with the IDN World Report, it's a project that we've been doing with UNESCO and URID for the last 10 years or so. last year we welcomed a new partner, the Coordination Center for the CCTLD RU and RF, that is the Russian registry, as a partner to the IDN World Report. And what we've been doing is just tracking adoption rates of IDN since they were launched on the market at the top level from about 2009 onwards. And we've explored issues such as the usage of IDNs, and also we really have been exploring the issues relating to the use of IDNs, so-called universal acceptance. So I'm going to run through today the key findings from last year's report, talk a little bit about universal acceptance and a study that we did at Oxford Information Labs on email internationalization, and also just a little bit of a focus on the region and how IDNs are doing here. So I'm just going to present a few charts and talk to them. So last year, you can see from the right-hand side, that's the total number of IDNs over time, going back to 2009, when there were just under 2 million registered in the world. And you can see that the growth is quite patchy. Last year, we had we tracked a total of 8.3 million domains, which was actually a minus growth rate of 8% on the previous year. I would caveat all of these figures by saying that particularly from the CCTLD world, a lot depends on the availability of those figures and the willingness of registries to share the information with us. And so sometimes we miss things because we're not aware of them. And so we are very much grateful to all of the registries in the region and worldwide who share their registration figures with us. When you look at the left-hand side chart, that's looking at that total breakdown of 8.3 million IDNs and looking at whether they're from the GTLD space or the CCTLD space. And you can see right away that IDNs are really a CCTLD story. The majority of IDNs are still registered in the country codes. And honestly, that makes sense because they're very much rooted to a location, to language, to culture. And that's really the role in many regards of the country code domains. You can see that last year in 2018, while we did see some drop overall, the real driver for that drop was happening in the GTLD space. This pie chart here shows a breakdown of all of those IDNs by script. And you can see right away that actually relatively few scripts make up the majority of registered IDNs. So Han script well over 50%, then Latin script, Cyrillic, Hangul kind of appeared as quite a large proportion last year, and that relates to, I think there's been some promotional activity by KISA, the CCTLD, and Arabic is in this chunk of other IDNs at the moment. So last year was also a big year. 2019 was a great year for URID, the .eu registry, because after 10 years of the IDN fast track for the .eu in Greek letters, because URID represents all of the official languages of the European Union and has 3 variants of the EU string, one in the familiar Latin script, one in Cyrillic, and finally in Greek script that was made live in November 2019. Now, I talked about IDNs being a CCTLD story, and one of the things that we map on the IDN World Report is the distribution of IDNs by script. And this also shows that the distribution of scripts very much matches what you would expect from the geography. So if we look here at the Middle East region and the adjoining countries where Arabic script is used, this green shows the Arabic script IDNs and where they are distributed. Likewise, Latin script in Europe and in Latin America, also in the former Soviet Union countries where Cyrillic script is the norm. You see that being the dominant script. And finally, of course, in China, Han script supporting local languages. The yellow are where there is mixed script, either in the case of India, where you have many scripts and languages spoken supporting the various official languages in India, or in the United States, Canada, the UK and Australia, where you would maybe tend to have quite an internationalized registrar base. One of the things that we do year on year is we map the use of IDNs and look at the languages of web content associated with these internationalized domain names. And our conclusion, what we have here is 3 lines. The first is the language of the global population. Sorry, the label is here a little bit clipped. What we see is that, for example, the English language is actually spoken by less than 10% as the native language of the global population. You have a lot of Chinese, Spanish, and here in the light blue, you have many other languages. UNESCO estimates that there are 6,000 languages spoken in the world, of which at least half will be. Oh, sorry. I hope that the slides are working okay now, everybody. But I'm very happy to share the slide deck. Apologies if there's been a glitch on that. I'm just catching up with the chat. Okay, so this first line shows how many languages are spoken in the world. And the second line shows the primary language of web content, where you see, depressingly, that English language is not only representing well over half of web content in the open web. This is according to the W3 Tech group. That actually has been growing year on year in the last few years. So the multilingual story in the open web is certainly going backwards as far as linguistic diversity is concerned. The lowest line in this chart, when we at the research team of the IDN World Report, we look at the language of web content, and we also make inferences based on the zone files that we don't have access to. And what we see is a much more even distribution of other languages across the base. So English language goes down to less than 10%. There's a lot of Chinese. Also, Japanese is very popular, Russian, and so on. And another aspect that we look at, if you start from the language of the web content, and let's have we map here. So if you look at French, Czech, Spanish web content that is associated with an IDN, and you look back at the IDN that is pointing to it, invariably you find that the script of the domain name very accurately signals the language that you're going to find on the web content when there's an IDN in place. So if we look at Arabic and Persian, for example, in 96% of cases where you have an Arabic language website associated with an IDN, that IDN will be an Arabic script one. And likewise with Persian as well, it's even a higher proportion, 99% of Persian language websites associated with IDNs are pointed to by an Arabic script domain name. But we talk about universal acceptance. This is a rather hard to understand phrase, but it really translates to meaning that IDNs don't work very well, whether it's in search, whether it's in mobile applications, or whether it's in email. And this is an area that we've been studying for many years. We're active members of the ICANN Universal Acceptance Steering Group Measurement Group, and there's been some great work within that community also trying to raise awareness of this issue. For URID last year, as part of the IDN World Report, URID asked us to evaluate 2 commercial full stack email systems, really to see whether there was something that URID could recommend to its registrar base as something that would really support the IDNs that URID offers. So naturally, for that study, we weren't really looking at all of the global scripts. We were just looking at those that are highly relevant for European audiences, which is Latin with Diacritics, Cyrillic, and Greek script. And as often happens in data-driven environments or experiments, we thought that it would be very simple to set up a benchmark test system against a best practice control, but that was where we actually encountered the most difficulty. So overall, we were looking at sending emails from Outlook, Macmail, Thunderbird, and also 2 webmails, Gmail and Outlook Online. We were looking at, how well they were authenticated, and the treatment both at the sending and the receiving mail transfer agents, and what happened to the message on its journey, and whether it was received, whether you could reply. There's a lot more detail in our report, which is published on the IDN website. But one thing I just wanted to highlight quickly here was that we'd hoped to use cPanel because we know that it's very widely used by the registrar community, particularly those who are hosting providers. And it's also underpinned by EXIM, which supports IDN out of the box. However, we found that unfortunately the cPanel environment was unable to support the email address internationalization, and we ended up making our own custom control environment using a combination of postfix and dovecot configuration. So we found that overall there was fairly good support in the underlying MTA software, and also for Unicode email prefixes and content and headers. But usually, once you started to use these applications, we encountered that there was some custom glitches. We were also finding, particularly with Greek script, which implements IDN, which relies on, I would say, IDNA 2008 for the terminal sigma character. We think that there may be a failure to implement IDNA 2008 among some very, very popular mail clients. And there was almost a sort of do-it-yourself approach, so that we were finding that even at the level of Punicode translation, a lot of these email messages were failing. So we're very much looking forward to working with the Universal Acceptance Group in the coming year, looking in more depth at universal acceptance in browsers and also social media platforms. So keep aware of those studies. I think they'll be coming through, I hope, in the summer. And finally, just in the last few minutes, I wanted to do a bit of a deep dive before we turn to questions on the region's experience of IDNs. Well, the first thing to note, and this is something also I would recommend, a study done by the Russian Registry, which really looks at the use of IDNs. how many of the, not just the CCTLDs, but there are also some new GTLD Arabic script domains, how many there are in terms of the number of choices available to people. However, the registration levels are still low. I think we're still looking at the sort of 10 to 12,000 across the region. Unfortunately, the y-axis seems to have got missed out on this picture, but I can double check that towards the end. We're not seeing a huge amount of volatility and a general steady growth. If you look towards the right-hand side of this chart, general steady growth across the region. I think my personal opinion is partly because of the usage problems that we encounter with IDNs. When we look at low quality content, which we suspect to be parking, domains which are just used as a sort of domain for sale website, we find that right across the board, there is high levels of parking in the IDN environment. Arabic script is no exception, with an 88% of domains, IDNs, suspected to be parking using our custom algorithm. However, if we look at the use of Arabic script domain names, and if we exclude the parked content, or we look at the proportion of parked and high quality content across the different languages, we see some interesting patterns. So I've got here the actual numbers, and on the right-hand side, I'm looking at the percentages. So we see that generally speaking, the numbers associated with Persian and Arabic language are fairly low. However, when we look across to see the proportion of high quality content, particularly in Arabic language, we see that nearly 70% of the Arabic script domains which are associated with Arabic script language are in that kind of multi-page, high quality content category. We would love to talk to you about your IDN experiences, and this is often one of the most valued and respected reasons why the Middle East DNS Forum is such a high point in the year for us, is to make those connections. And we are doing interviews, and we would welcome any sharing that you can give us, not only of your raw statistics, but also your experiences, whether it's with email address internationalization, other universal acceptance issues, or other mechanisms that you are experimenting with to market or to drive uptake. So finally, we see that consistently IDNs help to enhance linguistic diversity in cyberspace, and that they are accurate predictors of the language of web content. So there's huge potential for IDNs to drive a much more linguistically diverse open web environment. And I must say, this is an area where the social media platforms have done better than the DNS community in terms of supporting local languages, local scripts, and giving people an end-to-end environment in which, apart from their login, they can use their own language and talk to friends and have a lot of automatic translation. Universal acceptance, the use of these domains still remains highly challenging. As Ali said, I thought that was an excellent observation. The responsibility for making that work is moving up and up the stack, up to the software and application level. Nevertheless, it ought to be an urgent action point for all of us in this community. There are many CCTLDs in this region offering IDNs. Uptake and usage is limited. However, we do see that high quality content associated with Arabic script domains in the region. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm very happy to pause here and answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emily. That's very interesting. So we have a question from Bashar Al-Abdelhadi, and he says, are there any tools available for the public from your firm to scan websites and identify primary language of the website, and if the website offers multilingual version of the website, to automate process of identifying sites, websites. For example, CCTLD operators can use to generate similar statistics for their CCTLD.
Oh, that's a very interesting suggestion. That's not something that we've come across before, but maybe we can talk offline about that. It's not something we currently do, but it would, you know, we are constantly interested in ways to get to the web content of the CCTLD environment. You could see from the presentation that the majority of IDNs are located in CCTLDs. And we did a small study for Centre last year, the year before actually, and where some European CCTLDs shared their zones or part of their zones with us. And the language usage is just much more vibrant in the CCTLD world than you tend to see in the open zones of the GTLD environment. So would be very, very happy to talk to you more offline on that and to see where we could get to. But thank you for that suggestion and that question.
Thank you, Emily. Any other questions from the floor? So we still have 4 minutes.
Oh, what should we talk about? So
I can ask a question. Thank you, Emily, for the presentation. In your research, were you able to get some, you know, insights from those you interviewed or communicated with in the Middle East about reasons behind the decline in IDN registrations, particularly Arabic IDNs?
Thank you, Bacher. Every year we run a sentiment survey, and we're doing it at the moment through Centre and the regional, so the APTLD community and others. And we ask the registry operators, you know, essentially how they're feeling about IDNs. You know, how's uptake compared to what you expected? What do you think user awareness is and support by your registrars? And generally speaking, people are getting more and more depressed about IDNs as time goes on. There seems to be almost a sort of fatalism that this is just not taking off. They associate, you know, that there are very low levels of end user awareness in their opinion. And of course, I think, you know, it's a vicious circle, if you like, because they don't work very well. So people can't really use them. People don't see them in advertising or in usage. You can't use them as that sort of handy login for a lot of today's popular applications. And so they kind of go into the background. And as a result, I think that the difficulties, the challenges that causes is that it drives a lot of investment decisions, or rather doesn't drive investment decisions. I would just highlight that I was reading an article about the early days of Facebook a few months ago. And this article said that the key thing that changed Facebook's fortunes from being a successful national type of old friends type of thing to something that was a global movement was that one of the early seniors, who was a native Spanish speaker, just sort of went home one weekend and translated the entire environment into Spanish and created an environment where people who are Spanish speakers could just be really comfortable. And for me, the frustration of working in this area, you know, Baher, you and I have worked in this area for so many years now, and we always think that this year will be the big year for IDNs. And of course, we remain hopeful, but I do feel it's still an opportunity that's waiting, that's latent. And I hope that that the usage issues will be cleared up and resolved, and that people will be able to navigate and use their own languages in domain names if they choose to, in just the same way that they can in other environments online.
Thanks very much, Emily. So we're on the top of the hour. Thank you so much, Emily. Next,
Thank you, Fahad.
Thank you for being with us, Emily. Bye.
Thank you. Lovely to see you.
So next is another presentation by my colleague Sarmad Hussain. So Sarmad Hussain is the Senior Director for IDNs and Universal Acceptance at ICANN. And he will be presenting today about IDN variant TLDs. Of course, Sarmad is based in Pakistan. So Sarmad, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fahad, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm basically present an introduction to IDN variant TLDs and share with you some of the work which is ongoing in the community to enable IDN variant TLDs. So let me provide you with a bit of a background, starting with the definition of variants itself. As far as variant labels are concerned, we basically typically consider any labels which are considered quote unquote same by the relevant community, script community, to be variant labels. However, the definition of variant is a little hard because this, what is considered same can be interpreted in very different ways. We can, for example, call things or strings which are similar looking to be variants. We can have two different strings which mean the same thing, and they could be considered variants. We could obviously have transliteration of a label across or in a different script, for example, in Latin, and that could be considered a variant. We could have labels which sound the same, and they could be considered variants. So it's when this came up at ICANN the discussion started in late or around 2010. It was not really very clear what a variant is, and so therefore at that time the ICANN board basically suggested that though it is an interesting concept, it's a relevant concept, but more homework needs to be done on determining what are variants before any further work on top-level domain variants actually can be undertaken. So in 2010, they resolved to basically say that no variants for GTLDs will be delegated, and really ask the community to take up this work to provide what are variant management solutions. That triggered a series of case studies initially in around 2011, where Arabic, Chinese, Cyrillic, Devanagari, Greek, and Latin script communities looked at their own scripts and basically tried to see what a variant should be, or what is a definition of a variant for that particular script. And the data which came in from those script studies basically integrated into what is now called the Integrated Issues Report, published in 2012, identified two main issues or problems which need to be resolved. What they found out was that the different case studies identified the variants in different ways. So Arabic script variants requirements were different from for example, with Chinese script variants, and so on. So they identified that there is no one common definition of what IDN variant TLDs would be. And then even if we knew what a variant is, there is no common framework to manage an IDN variant TLD. So those were two problems which needed to be resolved before one could go forward and allow for variant top-level domains. So let's start with the definition part. So as far as the definition is concerned, the community actually worked on this problem after the integrated issues report and came up with a solution. And the solution was reasonably straightforward, where community acknowledged that each script may have its own definition, and therefore the solution was that we need to go to each of the script communities and ask them to analyze their script and come up with the reasonable definition for their script. And each of those definitions for each of those different scripts will then be integrated into what was called the root zone label generation rules. And the procedure basically defined more operational details about and technical requirements about how to go about doing this. This procedure was eventually adopted by the ICANN board and implemented. And we are now in the process of working with all the different script communities globally to define the root zone label generation rules, or RZ/LGR, as it's known for short, for all these different scripts. And the way it's basically set up is that each script formulates a panel, which is called a generation panel. And they formulate the rules for variants and other relevant rules for label generations or domain name labels for the top level. And those rules are provided to a central panel called the integration panel, which, so each generation panel is only working on its own script, but then integration panel takes the input from all the different scripts and integrates that into one whole set of rules, which are called the root zone label generation rules. And they also take care of any cross-script kind of issues in case decisions from one panel is impacting one of the other panels as well. So each panel actually plays a role. If there are some additional discussions or needs for a particular proposal, integration panel can actually communicate with the generation panel to come to a common solution. And what each of the generation panels is doing is actually defining three things. It's listing which code points need to be or can be used to define a top level domain. It is also identifying, based on that short list of code points, which code points, if any, are variants of each other. And then they also identify whether there should be any other additional constraints which may apply on a label. Looking at Arabic script, for example, the base for all this work is the Unicode standard. So we start with the Arabic script tables in the Unicode. Example of that is provided on the screen here. But as you can see, it has many different kinds of characters. It has many characters, but it also has many different kinds of characters. So you would have the core letters, but you would also have digits, for example, as you can see in the last column, also in the 066 column. But in addition to digits and letters, you would also see that there are these combining marks. In the first column, there are also mathematical symbols, punctuation marks. So there are many different kinds of characters. And one of the things which was discussed in the LGR procedure was that for top level domains, we should only restrict the use to letters, and that's based on the RFC 1123, which restricts basically top level domains to be alphabetic only and should not consist of digits, for example, or or other marks. So as a starting point, what the integration panel does is looks at all these different code points or list of characters in the Unicode, and highlights those which can potentially be used for top level domains, and then also marks those in red or pink here, which should not be used in the top level domains, for example, digits or special symbols and so on. And that becomes a starting point for each of the script panels to work on. Then each of the script panels, there was actually an Arabic script panel, which was also constituted in 2013, and they worked for multiple years and eventually came up with a solution. The solution, while developing the solution, they had to take care of the script being used for many different languages across the globe in many different ways. So obviously there were discussions on which letters should be included, which should be excluded, and how the different letters can potentially become variants of each other, not only for Arabic language speaking areas, but for other language speaking areas, so that a comprehensive solution can be drawn at the script level. This eventually shows the final proposal, which was provided by the Arabic script panel. That panel contained about 35 members from 22 different countries. They basically, so as you can see, eventually they shortlisted the letters highlighted in green to be included for top level domains and excluded the letters which are in light blue. There is actually a proposal online which goes into detail on why these decisions were made. Again, based on the root zone LGR procedure, which was eventually implemented to guide this work. In addition to the shortlisting of characters, what the panel did is also go through all the different code points and the writing systems used to using Arabic script, and determine a set of variant labels for all the different for the different characters which were included or shortlisted. If you go to the HTML version, you get the slides through the organizers. But once you go to the HTML, which is a human readable form of the XML standard, which is being used for encoding these rules, you will see the complete set of these variants. But these are just some of the examples of variant sets which were identified by the script community. So as far as the status of this work is concerned, we identified initially 28 scripts for which we need to define these rules. 20 of these scripts have already finalized their work, and many more, as you can see, are close to finalizing their work. We are still actively working with these script communities to close the work and complete the root zone LGR for these scripts. Now so that defines the variant or mechanism. If you recall, the problem we were trying to solve was to determine what is a definition of a variant. So with each script community providing a very clear and clean definition of what a variant is, root zone LGR then actually answers that question. And what happens is that through that variant definition, then we create multiple kinds of variants, and some of those are actually provided in this slide. What you get is, the example at the top is what is referred to as a cross-script variant. Cross-script variant means that you have two strings which are identical, for example, in this case, but one string comes from the Latin script, and I've provided the Unicode code points with each of the strings. And the other variant actually comes from a different script. So if you look at the string at the top, EPIC in Latin, and the corresponding string in Cyrillic script. even though underlying representation is totally different, one in Cyrillic, one in Latin. Visually, these are identical, and therefore these need to be identified even across scripts to, for example, prevent security kind of issues. So this is an example of a cross-script variant. If you go to the example at the bottom of the screen, that is an example of a cross-language variant within the same script. Basically, in this particular case, the string al-Saudia on the left-hand side is using the code points which is used by Arabic language, whereas the one on the right is representing the same string, but written using Urdu language. So in these two cases, even though visually they may actually be slightly different, but the users still perceive them to be identical because these are just calligraphic traditions to write some letters in different ways. However, they obviously need to be identified from not only from a security perspective, but also from a usability perspective, because if the top-level domain is to be used across multiple geographic or different geographic regions, for example, countries which use Arabic should, if somebody is using the keyboard, they would generate the label on the left, and then countries which are using Urdu as a language and they're using that keyboard, when they type the same string, they would generate the string on the right. And therefore, both strings should potentially work if the domain name is to resolve through, through inputs coming from globally from all these different countries. And then finally, the third example is the Han script or Chinese, where it's you can actually have different representations in the within the same language because there are multiple possible writing conventions being used, and so it actually provides an example of a top-level domain which can be in simplified Chinese versus the traditional Chinese writing system. And also in this case, both are not only need to be, both labels need to be identified not only for the security reasons, but also from the usability reason, because different communities in different geographies use the two ways of writing Chinese to represent that same string. So there are motivations, two basic motivations. One, of course, that variants have to be identified to manage the security issues. Otherwise, it could create, for example, phishing problems. But also not only just security, but usability, because in some cases these need to be actually functional to make the domain names more globally accessible. And having gone through some of this work, it's interesting to see that if we count the in-script variants and the cross-script variants, even though we may think that variants is a reasonably localized phenomenon, but as you can see, we're listing these 28 scripts, we found that variants actually occur significantly, across a significant number of scripts. So all those scripts which are in red actually have shown at least one of the multiple types of variants which I've just introduced. So we've now sort of laid a basis that variants exist, and in at least some cases we do need variants to be operational, but they cannot be operational just by defining them. As the original work represented, there are two problems to be solved. The first one was to define them, which we've done. But the second problem was to also identify how variant TLDs would really be managed before we can actually obviously start delegating them. So to answer that question, ICANN.org has actually worked over past multiple years and developed a set of recommendations under the direction of the board IDN working group, which basically work on a set of starting premises, basing the work on IDNA 2008 standard, the integrated issues report done by the community, and the various Security and Stability Advisory Committee reports, for example, the SAC 60 report, which talks about IDN variant TLDs. So it has looked at the existing literature, both from linguistic and technical communities, and tried to base the work or recommend how to manage variant TLDs based on this work already done. It has also looked at the processes basically used to apply for and then eventually to operate new GTLDs as well as IDN CCTLDs, to see also see what other considerations need to be taken into account. And of course, since it is going to be the first time that IDN variant TLDs are going to be delegated, we want to make sure that we take forward a very conservative approach to manage the risks. And then over time, with experience, one can accommodate, I guess, more innovation in this area. So given that background, as I shared, ICANN worked under the guidance of our ICANN board, IDN working group, and developed and published a comprehensive set of recommendations and auxiliary documents supporting those or explaining those recommendations and identifying additional analyses and risks and mitigation, and published these documents in 2019, taking it through a public comment process. Based on the public comment, the final documents published actually made 9 recommendations. I'm not going to go through all these recommendations in the interest of time, but you can actually visit these documents and look through them. So I'll just highlight a couple of recommendations. So for example, recommendation 1 suggests that root zone label generation rules are the only source of valid TLDs and their variant labels. So to define variant labels, root zone LGR is the single point of reference, as it has been determined and developed by the relevant script communities. The second recommendation basically says that from a security to manage the security perspective, variant top level domains must be allocated to the same entity. You cannot, if you allocate variant TLDs to 2 different entities and they run them in parallel as 2 different TLDs totally disjointed from each other, it can potentially cause phishing issues across TLDs. So there are security considerations for obviously making that happen. And then there are many other recommendations. Again, please take a look at the document if you're interested, which explains these recommendations and also associated analyses. So following the publication of these recommendations after the public comment process, ICANN board has now approved these recommendations and shared these recommendations with CCNSO and GNSO, requesting them to consider these recommendations as they define and develop IDN variant TLD management policies and processes. And they've also requested both CCNSO and GNSO that while they develop their own policies and processes for managing IDN variant TLDs, while considering these recommendations, they should also keep in close touch with each other to make sure that the policies for IDN CCTLD variants and IDN GTLD variants are consistent. and do not diverge significantly. So in addition to look at the root zone LGR in a little more detail, because it formulates a essential technical baseline for all this work, ICANN board actually reached out to all the SOs and ACs, as well as the Internet Architecture Board, and requested them to study root zone LGR and make any additional recommendations they could in the use of root zone LGR for identifying and using it for top-level domains. The study group, the technical study group, also came up with a set of recommendations which were approved by ICANN board in January of 2020, and they were also forwarded to the CCNSO and GNSO councils to take these recommendations into consideration, in addition to the IDN variant TLD recommendations in their policy development process. So as next steps, currently GNSO and CCNSO are actively developing their policies to identify and manage IDN variant TLDs. So those policy development processes are currently underway. I've provided a link to the PDP processes for CCNSO. The work is currently active. This policy development process is currently active for GNSO. Part of it was already integrated into the policy, which is currently finalized, recently finalized by GNSO through the sub-pro work, and they've also now chartering an additional expedited policy development process on IDNs. And while they do the policy development, they are considering the work on root zone LGR, the IDN variant TLD recommendations, and the recommendations by the technical community. The work already done by GNSO in the sub-pro actually already takes many of these recommendations on board, whereas the rest of the recommendations are being considered in the additional expedited PDP, for example. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarmad. So do we have any questions for Sarmad? We still have 2 more minutes. Okay, so seeing none, Sarmad, I have a question for you. So
okay, go ahead. Yeah, I was going to ask a question as well, but you go first. No,
go ahead, Bahar. Go ahead, no problem.
Sarmad, thank you for the presentation. It's I just put a tweet about one of your slides where you displayed the different characters in the Arabic script with the colors and so on, and I thought that maybe for newcomers, those who are attending a speech on IDNs or variants for the first time, probably for them it would sound like too complex. Why the hell are we doing all this? So in Emil's presentation, she did touch upon this. She talked about linguistic diversity and making internet accessible for non-English speaking community and so on. But I want to ask you, as an IDN program head, why do we do this? Why do we seem to complicate things? And I'm not saying that we do, but just wanted to hear your take on this.
Sure. So I think there are, we through ICANN's even bylaws, but more importantly also for serving the internet is for a global community, and eventually at the end of the day, internationalized domain names are motivated to provide that interface to that global community for the addressing system in their own languages and scripts. So when we are talking from an aspect of Arabic script, Arabic script is used very broadly across the globe for writing many different languages. So when the work was going on the Arabic script generation panel, they listed more than 100 languages which use Arabic script in writing, normally in their daily life. And the way, Arabic script has evolved over hundreds of years for these communities, the use of Arabic script is very diverse. So for example, the way I would use Arabic script in, for example, one language in Asia may be very different from how Arabic script is used to write another language in Africa. And when we're making rules for top-level domains, the rules have to cater to all the script communities across the globe, not just a particular country or particular region. So there is a so when you're looking at it, you really need to look at the larger and bigger picture, which adds some complexity to the work. Additional complexity comes because, as I said, there are two competing things which need to be balanced when you're designing such label generation rules. One is obviously the linguistic diversity and our intent to support as much of that as possible within the domain name system. However, as we broaden the list of characters which are available for domain name registration, what that also does is also increases the potential security problems. And so for example, as I was explaining, one of the main motivations of variants, in addition to usability, is actually security. That if you do not define variants, you can actually make the domain name system insecure. So when the work was done, the intent was to balance both aspects. So you want to increase your outreach as much as possible so that you can support as many of the Arabic script using communities as possible across Africa, Asia, and the globe actually, while also making sure that the solution we're developing remains secure, and that balance. So that wide coverage of Arabic script across many different geographic regions for many different languages, hundreds of languages, and that additional requirement of security does make the solution slightly complex. But at the end of the day, we have tools which can, as was also shared by Ali in the earlier presentation, there are tools which can hide that complexity behind them. And we can make these rules available for more, to be comprehended by normal users through those tools. And we are also making those tools available through ICANN. So, for example, we have LGR processing tools which give you very easy to use read HTML versions of XML files, as well as you can manipulate labels using these LGRs in a very easy to use interfaces where you can just type a label and it will give you a variant set of variants without really telling you all the details or complexities of how actually it came about. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarmad. So we have another question from Timothy Roy, and he says, how are IDNs and mail servers working with respect to the mail transport agent, MTA? So I think this will be taken up in one of the sessions which is following. It's a panel discussion on universal acceptance. So we have actually done work on determining how many of the different email tools, including MTAs, but also MUAs and MTAs and MSAs, on which of those tools support IDNs as well as internationalized email addresses, which means UTF-8 on the left-hand side of the @ sign as well in the mailbox names. So I, once we're done, I can put a reference of that or link to that study in the chat.
but this is also a good question for discussion in the upcoming panel on UA following this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarmad. We have Yaovi Atahon who has his hand raised. So Yaovi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Father. I'll be brief. A very interesting question from Bahrain and what ICANN is doing, because currently, if someone is sending me an email in Chinese or in Arabic, I will not, maybe this will not be necessarily my preference. But when we look at the community globally, so ICANN is doing something complicated and very, very important. And my own opinion is that we should not be necessarily expect result in few years. Because if you have a community, a script community, and the literacy in the language is very high, these people will be very, very comfortable doing everything from the domain name, not the content. We are talking about not content, from domain name to everything. So they will be very, very comfortable doing everything in their scripts. So for me, we should look at the future, not necessarily the new future. And that is one reason of this complicated work ICANN is doing and very important for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaovi. Sarmad, would you like to react to that?
I think Jawi is right. I think this can touch upon very fundamental rights of people to be able to use their languages, in their daily life as well as online. So this work is very important for many, socio-economic reasons beyond the technology side of things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarmad. And with that, we conclude the morning session of the Middle East DNS Forum, the third day. I would like to thank all three presenters for their valuable contributions today. We will be reconvening at 11 a.m. UTC. So the next session in a little less than 90 minutes will cover universal acceptance. It's a panel discussion. It should be another interesting session. And right after the universal acceptance panel discussion, we'll be having a very short closing ceremony. So with that, I wish you a good afternoon and see you in less than 90 minutes. Thank you.